Hey everyone, my name's Austin Spencer. I am a motion graphics artist and graphic designer and videographer. I do a little bit of everything creative, and you might have seen some of my work for the Rocket City Trash Pandas, the Huntsville Havoc, the Huntsville Visitors Bureau. I've done stuff all over town, and today I'm going to walk you through a little bit of how I go through a logo design process and eventually get that to a full-blown motion graphic, like an animated logo. What we want to do now is they say, hey, so we've got some video content coming up. Do you do motion graphics? And then if you're like me, you say, yeah, I can do that. And then you go and Google the answers on how to do these kinds of things, because that's how I started in motion design. I kind of just faked it till I made it, and it's surprisingly not as hard as you'd think to learn. And hopefully, I can help speed that process up for you. So now we're gonna break this down in a way that is animation friendly, and I'm going to walk you through how to do that. So first and foremost, with After Effects, which we're going to use to animate, every individual piece that needs to move needs to be on its own layer, and that's kind of counterintuitive to how most people design things. So if you're working with another designer, that might be a little bit of a headache, but you just have to kind of work together to figure out how to make that work. So the first thing we're going to do here is separate each element that we're going to animate into its own layer. First, I'm going to turn this. Actually, we're going to keep this as a text layer, because there's some good text animation tools. We'll see if it works. So we're just primarily focused on this icon here. So what I like to do is, if I want to separate this into two different shapes that both animate separately, I'm going to cut one part of it, start a new layer, and then just Control-Shift-V, paste it right in the same spot. And then I'll label the layer green. And then same for this, cut and paste, gray. All right, so now you have your gray separated from your green. And what I'm thinking is, we'll do a simple animation today. But one thing that makes a really good logo animation is just kind of looking at what you've got there and seeing, how can this naturally turn into a moving object? Like what kind of movement am I seeing implied with the design, and how can I bring life to that? I'm seeing with the ring going around the green circle, I'm kind of seeing an expansion almost. I'm thinking of it as like the universe expanding, that kind of thing. So I'm thinking we'll animate it by scaling up each individual object, and then since the arrow implies movement, we'll maybe do the arrow cutting through the D at the end, if that makes sense. It might make more sense when you actually see it in motion, but that's my best way of describing it. So that means the arrow needs to be separate too. And that can get tricky when you start working with negative space. So my thought is we need to cut right along here and make this arrow a totally separate object. And keep in mind, this is just for animation purposes. Like with the logo, you're golden how it was, but with the animation, you need to alter how it's constructed a little bit, and you'll see why as we get into After Effects. So to cut there, we're going to use our pen tool. Just make a line. Oop, that didn't quite work. Let's use a square. So just make the edge of the square line up right there. And we're going to use our shape builder tool, which can be found right here. When you highlight multiple objects, you can use the shape builder to select what you want to stay connected and what you want separate. So if I want to turn this arrow into one separate object, I just click and drag across these two parts here, and then it turns it into its own thing. It's pretty cool. And then you can just trim your excess here that you had for cutting it. Yeah, so that's its own thing now. All right, so we got the arrow separate. We got the green circle separate. We got that separate. We're ready to animate that icon. And that's the most important part here. So everything's on its own layer. I'm going to label this one Davidson. And we can delete our excess here so that we're just working with what's on the final logo. And you'll just save your Illustrator file. Let's start new. And the cool thing about After Effects is you can literally just work with your Illustrator file. It knows how to read those. So that's all you got to save. And we're ready to go into After Effects. If you start doing this full time, and I'm talking to the audience too, like if you start doing this full time, I guarantee you like a third of your time on the job will be spent just waiting for software to boot up. All right. New project. Cool. Okay. So, honestly, I'm not joking around here. One of the hardest parts of a logo animation when you first get into it is just knowing how to import the design properly. I don't know why. For some reason, this would always escape me. So I'm going to walk you through it and make sure that you really get it the first time. So if you've never used video software before, down here is where you'll be, it's called your timeline. This is where you'll be making most of your adjustments to the actual like finished video project. Up here is where you'll keep all of your files and it'll keep you organized. So we're going to import into this box. You just right click, import, file, and then find your design. So mine was, where is it? Davidson. Okay, so you're going to click that. Import as composition, retain layer sizes. That's the most important thing that you highlight that. For some reason, I would always forget that step for a long time, but I finally know it by heart. And then import. Okay, so you got two things going on here. This is each individual layer as its own little file. You don't have to worry about that folder. What we're worried about is this. So this right here, when you have this little icon with the little film strip, that means it's its own little project or composition. So you double click that and it's already got all of your layers out on a timeline. And so you got this black background that's kind of distracting. We're going to use a white background. So to do that, you can do new, solid. Actually, no, let's do this. We're going to keep the background transparent, but for working purposes, we'll make the background white just so that it's easier to see everything. So to do that, you're going to right click off to the edge here, composition settings, background color, and you just make that white. And when you export, that white doesn't have to be there. You can make it transparent. That's what we're going to do, but we'll get to that at the end. All right, so here's your design, and it looks great. We're going to put it in motion. So the first thing you'll want to do probably is turn all of these into vector shapes that are editable within After Effects. Right now they're all just they're sort of like images, but you can tell it to take that vector data and turn it into shapes into After Effects. So you'll want to highlight them all, right click, create shapes from vector layer. And it keeps your originals, but you can just delete those because you won't need those anymore. And those are your shape layers. That little star, it means it's a shape layer. Davidson didn't transform. I think that's because it was text, yeah. But that's okay. We're going to keep the letters how they are. We'll move them around in a different way that doesn't involve like reshaping or anything like that. Okay, so let's start. I'm thinking this icon zooms in from the center and then kind of moves to the left, and then Davidson kind of comes out from behind. So for right now, we'll hide Davidson from the whole composition and come back to it later. And so to do that, you can click this little eye tool, and that just hides it temporarily. So you can toggle it back on at any point without deleting it. All right. So if you expand here while right-clicking, you'll have all these options start to like kind of accordion out. You got your position, scale, rotation, opacity. So position, you can move things left or right, up or down with these values. You can literally just click and drag the values and it works like a slider. It's pretty cool. Rescaling, rotating, opacity. So we're going to be working primarily with scale and position for this. And here's the thing. When you change this value, that's where it's at now. Like it's stuck unless you memorized what the original value was. So the way you tell it to move from point A to point B is with something called a keyframe. And a keyframe is where you mark where on this timeline here, see this little marker? You just mark where exactly you want it to have that particular value. So if I want the position to land here by the end of the animation, I'm going to move my marker to 2 seconds in and then click this little stopwatch. That's how you toggle keyframes. So that tells it, hey, at 2 seconds, that's where I want that shape to be. But that's not where I want it to start out necessarily. I want it to start out in the center. So I'm going to move just a little bit before. And just like Illustrator, After Effects has an align tool. So I'm going to align it to the center. And we'll do the same thing with the green circle here. So notice this little tool here, it'll let you toggle between your keyframes without having to like manually line it up just perfect. So I'm going to use that to toggle to the end. And it's always important to set your like final point before you move it around because you might lose track of where you want everything to end up at the end. And then center. Cool. So let's just eyeball what that looks like right now. So that's how it moves. Now it looks a little, choppy, but by the end of this, we're going to have it looking real smooth and realistic and animated. So for right now, we'll just keep that how it is. And I'm actually going to highlight this and move them in, and that'll make it move a little faster. Yeah, that'll work for now. Okay. So that's it landing in the spot it'll be at the end with Davidson. But what we're going to do first is before that movement takes place, we're going to scale both of those items up. So I'm thinking scale up, and then as soon as it's done scaling, it slides over. So I'm going to line up with this keyframe here. I'm going to add a keyframe for scale, meaning that's the size we want it to land on. And then go to the very beginning and make that scale 0 on both of these. So now if you play it, and you can press the space bar to play. Scales up, moves to the side. Okay, again, very basic movement and doesn't look great at the moment, but I'm going to get into the secret sauce of how to make that look like really lifelike in just a second. I'm thinking, let's make this move a little faster. Okay. So, to smooth this out, and this is the big secret sauce. Like once you know how to do this, that's what separates you from any old Joe Smo who's, using After Effects for the first time. Highlight all of your keyframes, and we'll do it here too. And click F9. Whoop. Did that work for me? Okay, yeah, I hate when my laptop doesn't work like my computer. Okay, normally it's F9, but if your laptop's malfunctioning like mine, what you'll do is right click, Keyframe Assistant, and then Easy Ease. And what that does is it tells your points not to move at a constant pace from point A to point B, but rather to kind of like gradually speed up and then slow down. And that's how objects in real life move. So it just looks a little more animated. So let's see how that affected everything. That's a lot better. It's not 100% there. I think that we can do more, but it looks so much better than how we started. I'm gonna speed it up just a little bit more. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Okay, I'm thinking really like whip it in, like zoom. And to do that, there's this really awesome tool called the graph editor. So what you want to do is highlight the points that you want to do the adjustment to. So it's these 2 scale points for me. And you'll see this little curvature tool. So initially this was just a straight line, but when we did that little easy ease effect, it kind of stretched them out near the top and the bottom here. And so that kind of smoothed things out. So what we can do is we can make this even smoother. And see how it really slows down at a much easier pace. So that means it starts off with most of the movement happening really quick, and then it slows down. That'll go a long way. And I'm thinking maybe we'll have the gray ring come a little bit before the green, and that just adds a little more character to it. So I'm going to take the starting point for the green circle and delay it by just a few frames. Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Yeah. And let's kind of do that same thing with the graph editor on the positioning. So we'll have it kind of zip and then slow down really slow at the end. So have those 2 points edited. Let's see. Let me try with just one. Okay, that's a little finicky. I think if you go to, there's a, yeah, graph type, speed graph. Yeah, that'll help. So yeah, if you go to graph type and then speed graph, that it'll give you those handles if you're not seeing them. And you can just click and drag those until it's a much smoother ramp. Let's see how that did. Pretty cool. I like it. All right. We haven't done the arrow yet, but we'll do that at the end because that's going to be a little tricky. We'll do the Davidson next. Okay, so I'm thinking when the icon slides over, it'll reveal Davidson. So let's start out with Davidson. First, let's make a mask. So to do that, we'll do shape layer. And we're just going to draw a square around the part of the frame that we're going to allow the text to show up in. Actually, I take that back. You can do it as, okay, the shape tells it where it's allowed to be, or you can do, okay, I want the shape to cover the space. So like we're going to actually cover it with this. And so that means anything over here. Oh, I'm doing a bad job explaining this. I shouldn't have done the mask. I take it back. Okay. Instead of having the logo reveal the text, we're just going to do a simple fade in. There are fancier ways we can do this, but I think a fade is going to be good for this beginner tutorial. So right about here, when they aren't overlapping anymore, we're going to change the opacity of this layer. So we'll click that to toggle our 100%. That's where we want it to land. And I'll set it over here. And then we'll do 0. So it fades in. So let's see how that all looks together. That's pretty good. I like it. All right, let's animate that arrow. This will be the big, if you can pull this off, that'll look really cool. So remember how we made the arrow its own shape? You can find that by going to contents, and then you see you have 2 groups going on here. One group is the arrow and the other is the circle. we're going to animate just the arrow. So we're going to go into group, path, and you can keyframe just that part of the path. So keyframe, and then maybe about right here we'll have that animation start. So make sure your selection tool's on, and then you can literally just, oh wait, actually, let's not do a path keyframe. Let's do transform. So they have the same transform tools like we had on these layers, but it applies just to this group. It's pretty cool how specific you can go. And let's see if we can slide it all the way without it jumping out on the other end. Yeah, just barely. That's okay. You can get creative with it. It doesn't have to be perfect right there. Maybe we could squish that arrow down by rescaling it a little bit. So scale, shrink it a little bit. Okay, so while it's moving left to right, it's also scaling up and revealing itself. Yeah. And we'll do that same easy ease effect. Easy ease. Let's go to the graph editor and really smooth it out. And you don't always have to do this exact curvature. Just for this one, I think it looks pretty nice to have it kind of dramatically like whoosh in. Yeah, it happens a little fast, so we're going to stretch these out a little bit. That's pretty cool. Let's see how it looks in the whole thing. Nice. I'm noticing. Did I go 100%? Oh, no, I only want 1%. That explains it. Okay, there we go. All right, whole thing. Okay. That arrow needs to come in sooner, I think. So let's take those keyframes. Let's just put them all the way at the beginning, I'm thinking. See how that looks. Okay. Maybe delay it a little bit so that it comes in after the zoom in. Yeah, I like that. I think we got it. That's a pretty solid animation. Okay, so I like that how it is. Another thing you can do just to add a little bit of emphasis to it if you're feeling it is motion blur. And that can add some cool liveliness to it, especially if you're really trying to convey like speed happening. So one way you do that is you click the layer that you want to apply motion blur to. And so like gray, this little column right here, if you click that, it'll add motion blur, and you can kind of, let me zoom in so you can see it. See how it's kind of fuzzy around the edges? So let's apply that to every layer and see how it affects the whole thing. And it might take a second to render. Oh, that time it worked pretty good. Yeah, you see, especially when it goes side to side, you really see some speed there. So yeah, just another cool little tidbit you can do. When you're done, you can take this little thing here to tell it how long you want the composition to be. I usually say 4 seconds is a good logo animation speed, or not speed, but time. So that's how long you want it to be. And let's say this is going to go on top of a background that the videographer's already put together or whatever. So we're just going to have a transparent background. That's how we'll export it. So to export, you go to composition, add to render queue, and then I usually do QuickTime. So you click that, format, QuickTime, and then make sure, this is the most important thing, RGB and alpha. That's how you get that transparent background. Okay, and then tell it where you want to export it to. So I'm going to say Davidson, save, and then just click render. And if you toggle your caps lock on while you render, it'll render a little faster because it won't try to like preview the whole thing for you while it's rendering. But if you do want to see it while it's rendering, then go for it with the caps lock off. But yeah, that's pretty much how you do it. That's a logo animation. So yeah, I hope that was helpful to some of you. I know that's like a lot to absorb in such a short amount of time. But the most important thing is that you're just familiarizing yourself with the software and kind of like getting my perspective on the process. That'll help you just kind of see maybe this is the way I need to approach it. And yeah, I hope you're able to take this and keep learning and keep creating and do great things with your new skills and your ambition. So thank you so much. Bye.